My family had a word for me. They'd been using it so long it stopped sounding like an insult and started sounding like a name. The dumb one. I answered to it the way you answer to anything you've heard since birth. I'm 27. I teach preschool in Westerville, Ohio, and 2 months ago I signed a piece of paper that should have cost me everything. It didn't, because someone had been building something behind my back for years, and the people who called me dumb never once thought to check whether the dumb one already owned the house they were trying to take from her. The documents were already on the table when I walked in, spread across the dining room like someone had been rehearsing this moment, which of course they had. My mother's coffee cup sat at her usual spot, a crescent of coral lipstick on the rim. My father had claimed the head of the table with his arms folded against his chest, his gaze pinned to the backyard window as if he'd rather be anywhere else, and making sure everyone could see it. A man I'd never met occupied the far corner, older, gray at the temples, a leather briefcase propped against his chair leg. He had a notary stamp and a professional expression that gave away nothing. In the next room, my sister Jess was on FaceTime with her fiancé, laughing at something he said, her voice carrying through the open doorway the way it always did. Jess never needed to lower her volume for anyone. She was 31, a mortgage broker, engaged, and by every metric my family recognized, the one who had turned out right. I had driven 40 minutes from Westerville to Reynoldsburg on a Saturday morning because my mother had called Thursday night and said, "Family meeting, Saturday. Don't be late," then hung up without explaining a single thing. "Sit down," my mother said. Rhonda Odom did not waste words on greetings when there was business to handle. "We need to sort out your grandfather's house." I pulled out the chair across from her. The wood scraped against the floor and Jess's laughter went quiet for a second, then resumed. "I thought we weren't doing anything with it until the new year," I said. "Plans changed?" My mother straightened the stack of papers between us, aligning their edges with her fingertips. "Your sister needs equity for her wedding. The house should go to someone who can actually use it." My father nodded without turning from the window. "It's the practical thing, Haley." I looked down at the papers. Dense paragraphs. Legal language I could feel my brain sliding off of the way water slides off glass. I recognized my name and my sister's name, and an address I knew by heart. 412 Maple Ridge Road, the house where my grandfather Lloyd had lived for 43 years. Where he taught me to read on the front porch when I was 8 because my mother had decided testing wasn't worth the trouble. Where he made me breakfast on Saturday mornings and asked about my week as though it mattered. But Grandpa said he wanted the house to stay. Grandpa said a lot of things. My mother's voice softened just enough to sound patient. "He was old, Haley. He was confused toward the end. Sign here, and Mr. Fenton will handle the recording." She pushed the papers closer. "A quitclaim deed," the man in the corner explained when I glanced at him. "From me to my sister Jessica, relinquishing any interest I might have in the property," my mother added, as though she were clarifying something simple for a child, that my father was Lloyd's heir, but just in case Grandpa had done something funny before he passed, the family needed everything clean. She didn't explain what something funny meant. She didn't explain what a quitclaim deed actually transferred. She just pointed at the signature line and held out a pen. I turned the pen between my fingers, and something tugged at me. "I've been getting mail," I said. "Property tax notices for this house. They come to my apartment." My mother blinked once. A slow, controlled blink. "Computer glitch. The county makes mistakes all the time. Now sign." From the other room, Jess called out loud enough to reach every corner of the house. "Haley, it's not like you know what a property tax is." And there it was. The sound I'd been hearing my whole life, the small, bright bell of someone reminding me where I ranked. My mother leaned forward, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped into that warm register she saved for getting people to do things. The voice that came wrapped in velvet and lined with something sharp. "Honey, this isn't your world. Numbers, paperwork, deeds, that's Jess's territory. You're good with kids. Let us handle the grown-up stuff." I looked at the pen. I thought about every report card I'd signed without reading, every form I'd nodded through because someone was explaining too fast and I was too embarrassed to ask them to slow down. I thought about Grandpa Lloyd sitting on that porch, his hand warm on my shoulder, saying, They don't see you because they don't want to. But Lloyd was gone. He'd died in January of last year, and the house had been sitting empty for over a year while my father couldn't face cleaning it out, and my mother waited for the right moment, which apparently was the moment Jess decided she needed a wedding fund. I signed. The whole thing took maybe 8 minutes. 27 years of being the slow one, the dumb one, the one who watches children for a living, and it took 8 minutes to put my name on a line I didn't understand. Mr. Fenton notarized the signature, slid the papers into a manila folder, and shook my father's hand. On his way past me, he paused, just long enough for his eyes to land on mine with an expression I couldn't read. Then the front door closed behind him and he was gone. I gathered my purse and my keys and started toward the door, and my mother said, without looking up from her coffee, "Oh, I put your grandfather's tackle box in your trunk. Lord knows we don't need more junk around here." I said thank you because that's what I always said to my mother, and I walked out of the house feeling smaller than when I'd walked in. In the driveway, I sat behind the wheel of my Civic and didn't start the engine. My hands were on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, the way my grandfather taught me when I was 15, and I stared through the windshield at the lawn my father kept trimmed to HOA standards, and tried to understand what had just happened. Something had been placed in front of me and I had signed it. Something involving the only person who'd ever looked at me and seen someone worth trusting with anything at all. 8 minutes. That's all they needed. I thought about the tackle box in the trunk, Lloyd's old green metal box with the scratched lid and the largemouth bass sticker curling at the edges. He'd carried it to every fishing trip we ever took along the Scioto, and he'd spent the last 10 years of his life organizing its contents with the same quiet patience he brought to everything. My mother called it junk. My mother called a lot of things junk. I turned the key in the ignition and drove home. 3 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon, I was rinsing paint trays at the classroom sink while 14 four-year-olds slept on cots behind me. Red paint had dried under my fingernails and a streak of blue ran from my wrist to my elbow. The fluorescent light above the sink hummed its thin, buzzing note, the same note it made every afternoon during nap time, a sound I'd stopped noticing months ago. The room smelled like graham crackers and hand sanitizer, and the particular sweetness of children who had been running all morning and were finally, blessedly still. My phone vibrated in my back pocket. A Columbus area code, no name attached. I almost let it go to voicemail. I picked up. "Miss Odom? This is Gerald Fenton. I notarized your documents Saturday." I turned off the faucet and pressed the phone harder against my ear. "Yes?" Before I submit a deed for recording, I run a standard title verification. It's part of my process for real estate closings. He paused, and I could hear something careful in the space between his words, the sound of a man choosing his language precisely. "When I pulled the title for 412 Maple Ridge Road, I found something your family may not have told you." Water dripped from the faucet into the paint-stained sink. Behind me, a child shifted on her cot. "What do you mean?" "The property isn't part of Lloyd Odom's estate, Miss Odom. It was already transferred, 3 years ago." "Transferred to who?" I heard papers rustling on his end. Then his voice again, reading this time, slow and measured. "The deed was recorded on the 14th of March, 2023. Grantor, Lloyd Allen Odom, grantee." Another pause. Longer than the last. Haley Marie Odom. The classroom was so quiet I could hear the second hand of the wall clock above the cubbies. A school bus braked outside the window. I held the phone against my ear and let the name settle over me like something falling from a great height. "That's me," I said. "Yes, ma'am. That's my name. The property has been in your name for approximately 3 years, Miss Odom. Your grandfather transferred it to you via a recorded deed, a general warranty deed. The quitclaim you signed Saturday would transfer your property to your sister." He let that sit for a moment. "I wanted to make sure you understood that before I recorded it." My legs softened under me and I lowered myself onto the edge of the nearest cot. A boy named Marcus, 4 years old, the one with the stutter I'd been working on all semester, opened one eye and squinted up at me. "Miss Haley, you okay?" "I'm okay, sweetie. Go back to sleep." He closed his eye and rolled over, and I sat there with the phone pressed against my ear and my free hand gripping the aluminum frame of his cot, and I tried to understand what Gerald Fenton had just told me. 3 years. The house had been mine for 3 years. The property tax notices that arrived at my apartment every quarter, the ones my mother told me to throw away because the county had made an error. They weren't errors at all. Franklin County had sent them to me because I was the owner. Because my grandfather, who my family said was confused and old and didn't know what he was doing, had gone to an attorney and signed a deed and recorded it at the county courthouse and put the house in my name. He had done it quietly. He had told no one. And I had nearly signed it all away over coffee on a Saturday morning because my mother pointed at a line and my sister laughed from the next room, and I was too trained in compliance to ask what the papers actually said. "I own the house?" I said. "Yes, ma'am. Since March 2023. And the paper I signed gives it to Jess?" "That's correct. If you want me to proceed with recording, I will. But in my professional judgment, you should consult an attorney first." "Don't record it," I said. My voice sounded different to me, as though someone had tightened a string that had been slack for years. "Don't record anything." "Understood, Miss Odom." I hung up. I sat on the edge of Marcus's cot with 14 sleeping children breathing softly around me and the classroom clock ticking its way through the afternoon, and I held the phone in both hands like something precious, or maybe something dangerous, and I let the truth work its way through me one piece at a time. I had owned a house for 3 years without knowing it. My grandfather had given it to me the way he'd given me everything, quietly, without expecting anything back, because he saw something in me that the rest of them refused to look for. The dumb one, the slow one, the granddaughter who could barely read out loud in 3rd grade, and somehow the one Grandpa chose. That evening I carried the tackle box up from my trunk and set it on the kitchen counter of my apartment next to a pot of leftover soup and a stack of ungraded shape worksheets. I didn't open it. I stood with my hands on the counter and stared at the base sticker and the scratched green lid, and something inside me split into 2 people. The first was the Haley they'd raised. Call your mother, tell her what happened, give the house to Jess, make it easy, smooth things over, because you don't know a thing about property or deeds or any of the grown-up stuff, and fighting will only prove what they've always said about you. The second was someone I barely recognized, a voice that sounded like mine but steadier. He chose you. Of every person in this family, every one of them, Lloyd walked into a lawyer's office and put your name on the line. He paid to have it recorded. He kept it secret for a reason. That's not confusion. That is a plan. I picked up my phone and called a friend from school, the other pre-K teacher who ate lunch with me every day in the break room and never once called me slow. "My grandfather left me a house," I said, "and nobody knew." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. I should probably just let my sister have it." "Why?" "Because that's what makes sense." "For who?" She let the question sit there on the line between us, and I looked at Lloyd's tackle box on my counter, the base sticker he'd pressed on when I was 9, the latch he'd oiled every spring. He took me fishing every summer from the time I could hold a rod. He never told me to read faster, or try harder, or be more like Jess. He just sat next to me on the bank of the Scioto and said, "Patience isn't slow, sweetheart. Patience is smart." I didn't open the tackle box that night, but I didn't call my mother either. And that was the first decision I had made for myself in years. The choice to do nothing, to wait, to sit with an uncomfortable truth instead of smoothing it over for someone else's comfort. Tomorrow I would figure out what to do. Tonight I stayed where I was, letting the weight of what my grandfather had done settle into the quiet of my kitchen, and I did not give it away. The next morning I called in a personal day at the preschool. The assistant director said she hoped I was feeling better, which meant she assumed I was sick, and I let her assume it because the truth was too strange to say out loud. "I'm taking the day off to go downtown and look at a piece of paper with my name on it so I can make sure my dead grandfather really did give me a house." That sentence belonged to someone else's life. It had landed in mine by accident, and I needed to see the proof before I could believe it. The Franklin County Recorder's Office occupied a floor of a building on South High Street that smelled like old carpet and copy toner. I gave the woman at the counter the address, 412 Maple Ridge Road, and waited while she typed it into her system. She had reading glasses on a chain around her neck and a paper cup of coffee going cold beside her keyboard, and she didn't look up when she said, Here it is. She turned her monitor so I could see. General warranty deed, with Lloyd Allen Odom listed as the grantor and Haley Marie Odom as the grantee. Recorded the 14th of March 2023 at the Franklin County Recorder's Office. Filed, stamped, indexed, assigned a document number. Official in every way a piece of paper can be official. And on the scanned image of the original, in the blank where the grantee's name had been printed, I could see my grandfather's handwriting. The slight leftward tilt, the careful capital H. He had written my name himself. I asked for a certified copy. It cost $4.50. I paid in cash and carried the paper into the hallway and stood under the fluorescent lights with my back against the wall and read my name 3 times, Haley Marie Odom, each time slower than the last, and each time it looked more real, and the hallway felt a little less like a government building and a little more like the front porch of a house on Maple Ridge Road where an old man had sat with his granddaughter and said, "Patience is smart." I drove home with the certified copy on the passenger seat, face up, like a passenger I was afraid to take my eyes off. That evening, I finally opened the tackle box. It had been sitting on my kitchen counter since the night before. Lloyd's green metal box with the scratched lid and the base sticker I'd watched him press on when I was 9. I unlatched it and lifted the lid and the smell came up all at once. Lake water and WD-40 and something faintly metallic, the particular scent of fishing hooks and old lead sinkers, and hours spent on the bank of the Scioto doing nothing in the best possible way. The hooks were organized by size in the top tray, each one in its own little slot. The lures were hand-tied, feather and thread wrapped tight around barbed steel, and they looked the way they always had, patient and precise, the work of a man who knew in his bones that doing something right mattered more than doing it fast. I lifted the top tray out and set it beside my soup pot. Underneath, tucked in beside a bag of split-shot sinkers, I found a folded newsletter. Worthington Rotary Club, Spring 2022. The front page had a group photograph, and there in the center was my grandfather with his arm around a younger man I'd never seen. The caption read, "Lloyd Odom and Theo Rankin at the annual service dinner." I stared at the name. Theo Rankin. It meant nothing to me. I set the newsletter beside the certified deed and kept looking. Deeper, in a small compartment designed for extra treble hooks, something caught the light. A key. Flat, brass, no bigger than my thumb. A strip of masking tape wrapped around the head with my grandfather's handwriting. First National, Box 1247. A safe deposit box key. He had taped it down with a square of electrical tape to keep it from rattling, then buried it under fishing supplies in the one container he knew would end up with me, because my mother had looked at 43 years of memories organized in green metal and called it junk, and junk was what Haley got. I sat back on the kitchen stool and stared at the contents spread across my counter. The deed, the newsletter, and the key, each one placed inside the tackle box like a layer in an archaeological dig, and each one pointing somewhere specific. The newsletter pointed to a name, the key pointed to a bank, and the deed pointed to me. Lloyd had not been confused. Lloyd had been building something. He'd started in 2022, or maybe earlier, and he'd laid it out piece by piece the way he tied his lures, with steady hands and a purpose that didn't need to announce itself. He had planted breadcrumbs and hidden them in the one place he knew would reach me, because Rhonda would always give Haley the leftovers, the things nobody else could use. Everything the family threw away had been carrying me toward this moment. The next morning I found a phone number for Theo Rankin, attorney at law, Worthington, Ohio. His office was listed above a dry cleaner on High Street, and when I called, a woman answered and asked if I had an appointment. I said I didn't, but that my grandfather was Lloyd Odom, and there was a pause on the line that lasted long enough for me to hear the dry cleaner's machines humming through the floor. Then the woman said, "Can you come in at 2?" His office was small and tidy, a desk with an inbox, a computer, and a framed Rotary Club plaque on the wall. On the credenza behind him, a photograph in a wooden frame showed 2 men standing on a riverbank with fishing rods. One was my grandfather, the other was the man sitting across from me now. And between them, resting on the ground, was Lloyd's green tackle box. I'm Haley Odom, I said. Lloyd Odom's granddaughter. Theo Rankin leaned back in his chair and looked at me for a long moment, and what I saw in his face was something I had almost never seen directed at me. Recognition, as though he'd been expecting me to walk through that door for years. I've been waiting for you, he said. Waiting? Your grandfather told me, when they come for the house, and they will, my granddaughter is going to need help. He first came to me in 2022. We spent months planning. The deed was signed and recorded March 2023. I sat there with my purse in my lap and my hands folded the way I folded them during parent-teacher conferences, tight, controlled, giving nothing away, and I tried to understand what he was telling me. He knew they'd try to take it? He knew who Rhonda was. He knew what Jess would do. He came to me because he wanted this done right. General warranty deed, recorded at the county. A completed transfer. He didn't use a will because a will can be contested in probate. He wanted something finished. Something that couldn't be undone by a family meeting and a pen. My throat tightened. Why didn't he tell me? Theo Rankin was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said, gently, as though he'd been waiting 3 years to deliver this particular sentence. He was afraid you'd give it back. And that landed somewhere in the center of my chest and stayed there, because it was true. If Lloyd had sat me down on the porch and said, Haley, I'm giving you the house, I would have shaken my head and told him to give it to Jess. Jess needs it more. Jess knows what to do with a house. I'm just the one who teaches 4-year-olds. I would have handed it back the way I'd been handing things back my entire life. Cheerfully, instinctively, because somewhere along the way I'd been taught that keeping something for myself was selfish, and giving it away was the price of being allowed to stay in the family. Lloyd knew that. He'd watched it happen for 27 years. So he took the choice away from me. He put the house in my name and sealed the evidence in a tackle box and told his lawyer to wait, because he knew his granddaughter's greatest weakness was the same as her greatest strength. She always put everyone else first. Theo opened a file on his desk. The quitclaim you signed was never recorded. Mr. Fenton held it at your instruction. Even if it had been recorded, a quitclaim signed without informed consent is challengeable, but since it was never filed, the point is moot. He looked at me over the file. You are the recorded owner of 412 Maple Ridge Road, Haley. Your family can challenge the deed in court, but they would need to prove your grandfather lacked the mental capacity to execute the transfer. And your grandfather. He paused, and a faint smile crossed his face. Your grandfather was the most thorough man I ever met. He thought of everything. Everything. The way he said that last word told me there was more, something specific he was holding back, but I didn't push. I had enough to carry for one afternoon. What if they fight it? I asked. Let them try. Friday morning, I drove to the First National Bank branch on Sawmill Road with the brass key in my jacket pocket and my driver's license in my hand. The safe deposit box room was in the basement, cool and fluorescent, with metal drawers lining the walls from floor to ceiling. The clerk scanned my ID and typed something into his terminal, then looked up. You're listed as the authorized party, Miss Odom. Another layer. Another breadcrumb. Lloyd had added my name to the access list, probably the same week he recorded the deed. One more piece in a structure he'd been building while the rest of the family went on calling him confused. Box 1247 was small, the size of a shoebox. I carried it to the private viewing table and sat down and opened it. Inside, on top, lay a sealed envelope. Cream-colored, the kind you buy at a stationery store, heavier than standard paper. On the front, in my grandfather's handwriting, 5 words. For Haley. Open when you need it. Underneath the envelope, a copy of the recorded deed, a notary acknowledgement, and a receipt from the county recorder's office. The paperwork was stacked neatly, squared at the edges. Backup copies, in case the originals were lost, or taken, or destroyed by someone who'd rather they didn't exist. I picked up the envelope and broke the seal. 1 page. His handwriting, the leftward tilt I would recognize anywhere, the pen pressed firm the way it always was when he was writing something that mattered. Dear Haley, if you're reading this, they came for the house. I knew they would. Your father is my son, and I love him, But he married a woman who counts people the way you count change, by what they're worth to her. And your sister learned to count the same way. They call you slow. They call you dumb. They have been wrong about you since you were 8 years old, and your mother decided a little girl who reads differently must not be reading at all. I gave you the house because you are the only one in this family who ever sat with me without wanting something. You visited because you loved me, not because of what I had. Jess will always be fine. She knows how to take. You never learned that, so I gave instead. Don't let them talk you into giving it back. That's not kindness, sweetheart. That's the habit they trained into you. The house is yours. You are yours. Love, Grandpa Lloyd. I read it twice. I read it 3 times. My hands were shaking, and it had nothing to do with the cold air in the vault room. Something was happening inside my chest. A slow turning, like a lock that had been frozen for years finally giving way. I pressed the letter flat against the table with both palms and held it there. He saw me. Through all of it. Through every family dinner where my mother introduced me as the one who watches children, and every Thanksgiving where Jess corrected me in front of cousins. Through the years I stopped raising my hand, and the years I stopped trying, and the quiet decade where I became someone who went along with things because going along was easier than being told I was wrong again. Through all of it he saw me. He saw the girl on the porch who read to him when his eyes got tired. He saw the granddaughter who drove 40 minutes every Saturday for no reason except that she loved him, and he did something about it. Quietly and legally and permanently, while he still could, before the fog started closing in. I folded the letter along its original creases and slid it back into the envelope and placed it in my bag, next to the certified deed copy from the county recorder. Then I closed the safe deposit box and carried it back to the clerk and walked out of the bank into the Friday morning light. I owned a house. I had a lawyer. I had a deed recorded at the county and a letter from the man who put it there. For the first time in my life, I was completely certain of one thing, and it was this. Lloyd Odom had loved me. He had loved me in the specific, careful, documented way of a man who had learned the hard way that love without action is just a word, and that the people around his granddaughter had been using words against her for her entire life. So he gave her something they couldn't talk her out of, something made of ink and stamps and public record. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot and held the steering wheel and breathed. I had the proof. I had the protection. I had Lloyd's voice in an envelope in my bag, telling me I was allowed to keep what was mine. What I did not yet have was the courage to walk into my mother's dining room and say it out loud. But I could feel it building, somewhere below the fear, the way water builds behind a dam that has just developed its first crack. It was coming. I could wait for it. I'd learned patience from the best. The following Saturday, I drove to my parents' house in Reynoldsburg without an invitation. I had spent the week rehearsing what I would say, standing in front of the bathroom mirror before school each morning and forming the words, then losing them again by the time I parked at the preschool. The certified deed copy was in my bag. Lloyd's letter was next to it, sealed in its cream envelope, the corners soft from how many times I'd taken it out and put it back over the past 7 days. I had touched it so often the paper had started to feel like cloth. I walked in through the side door the way I always did. My mother and father were at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd signed the quitclaim 2 weeks earlier. The chairs where Jess and Mr. Fenton had sat were empty. My mother glanced up from a catalog she was marking with a felt-tip pen. "Where's Jess?" I asked, and my mother said, "She's at a showing," in a tone that suggested this was obvious and I should have known it. I stayed on my feet. I did not pull out a chair. I stood at the end of the table with my hands at my sides and said, "I know about the deed." 3 seconds of silence. My mother set down her pen. My father's arms unfolded from his chest, slowly, like a man hearing a sound he can't identify. "What deed?" my mother said. "The one Grandpa recorded 3 years ago. The house is in my name. It's been in my name since 2023. My mother let out a short laugh, half breath and half sound, the kind of laugh people use when they're buying time. "That's ridiculous. Your grandfather barely remembered where his keys were. He remembered my name." The laugh left her face. I watched it go, watched the shift happen in real time, the way confusion stepped aside and something harder moved in behind it. Calculation. My mother had spent her whole life reading rooms, and the room had just changed. Your grandfather was confused, Haley. He had those episodes toward the end. We can have the deed voided. On what grounds? She blinked. I had never asked a legal question. In 27 years of dinners and holidays and phone calls where she told me what to do and I said, okay, I had never once pushed back with a question that had teeth. On the grounds that he was an old man who didn't know what he was doing, she said, recovering, but there was a hairline fracture in her voice that hadn't been there before. My father, who had been staring at the table, spoke for the first time. Dad was sharp as a tack. Both of us turned to him. My mother's eyes cut across the table like a blade. My father looked at her, held her gaze for maybe a second and a half, then dropped his chin and went quiet. That was the longest he had contradicted Rhonda Odom in decades. I've spoken to a lawyer, I said. My mother's hands went flat against the table. A lawyer. You got a lawyer before talking to your own family? I could have argued. I could have pulled the deed from my bag and spread it in front of her the way she'd spread the quitclaim in front of me. But something Theo had said was sitting in the back of my mind, and Lloyd had lived by it too. You don't fight at the table. You fight in the paperwork. I left. I drove home with the deed still in my bag, untouched, and I spent the rest of the afternoon sitting on my apartment floor with the tackle box open beside me, running my thumb along the bass sticker, wondering whether I had just done the bravest thing I'd ever done or the dumbest. The phone calls started 2 days later. My Aunt Deb was first, on a Monday evening while I was grading name-writing worksheets. Haley, honey, your mother is just devastated. She's been crying all weekend. Can you please just talk to her? I told Aunt Deb that I had talked to her, and Aunt Deb said, you know what I mean, and I did know what she meant. She meant surrender. Uncle Roy called Tuesday from his truck. I could hear the highway in the background. Lloyd would have wanted the house to stay in the family, Haley. He wouldn't want one grandchild taking everything. I asked Uncle Roy how he knew what Lloyd would have wanted, and he said, it's just common sense, and hung up. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 2 years sent a text Wednesday. Heard you got a lawyer against your own parents. That's messed up. I typed 3 different replies and deleted all of them and set my phone face down next to Lloyd's tackle box and stood there for a while in the quiet of my kitchen. Thursday, Jess called. She didn't yell. She was calm in the way she was always calm when she was about to say something designed to land in the softest part of you. I'm not mad, Haley. I just think you need to really consider what you're doing. Grandpa was sick. Everybody knows that. And it's going to look really bad when people find out you took advantage of a man with dementia. She paused. I'm trying to protect you. I almost laughed. Jess, protecting me. Jess, who'd spent our entire childhood correcting me in front of company. Who'd told my mother's friends at Thanksgiving that I was basically a babysitter. Jess was not trying to protect me. Jess was trying to get a house she could flip for wedding money. But the way she said it, the practiced concern in her voice, the way she made it sound like she was the generous one and I was the problem, it worked. It always worked. That was the whole trick, and it had been working on me since childhood. 2 weeks passed like that. Each call scraped away a layer of the armor I'd built since the bank vault, since Lloyd's letter, since Theo's office. The family had a story, and the story was simple. Haley tricked a confused old man into signing over the house. She's stealing from the family. My mother told it to everyone she knew, and everyone she knew called me to pass it along, and with each call the version hardened a little more, the way a rumor sets like concrete. By the end of the 2nd week, there was not a single person in my extended family who had asked the one question that mattered. Why did Lloyd choose Haley? It never occurred to any of them. It was easier to believe I'd cheated than to consider the possibility that the dumb one had been chosen on purpose. The letter from the attorney arrived on a Wednesday evening. I found it in my mailbox when I got home from school, a long envelope with a return address I didn't recognize. Certified mail, signature required. I carried it upstairs to my apartment and sat on the kitchen stool and opened it under the overhead light with the tackle box sitting 2 feet away, where it had been since the day my mother handed it off like garbage. Inside was a letter on legal stationery from a firm called Henshaw and Pratt, representing Rhonda Odom. Attached were copies of medical records from my grandfather's physician. The diagnosis was dated September 2023, 6 months after the deed was signed. Early-stage dementia with recommendation for neurological follow-up. But the cover letter framed it differently. Evidence that Mr. Odom suffered from cognitive decline at the time of the purported transfer of real property, calling into question the grantor's capacity to execute a valid conveyance. Attached to the back, a formal notice of intent to challenge the deed in Franklin County Probate Court. I read the medical records slowly, the way I'd learned to read when I was 8, and every word was a fight. Cognitive decline, impaired judgment, progressive, with a recommended evaluation by a specialist. I pictured my grandfather's face, the way he looked sitting across from me at his kitchen table, his eyes clear and focused, his hands steady as he tied a fishing lure. I heard his voice asking about my students, remembering their names, asking how the little boy with the stutter was coming along with his reading. And then the other voice, the one my family had spent my whole life installing in my head, came back louder than it had been since the day I walked out of Theo's office. "You're too dumb to see what's happening. You trusted a sick old man because you needed to trust someone, because you needed someone, anyone, to think you were worth something, and now a law firm is telling you the truth you've been too stupid to accept." I grabbed my phone and called Theo. It went to voicemail. His office was closed. It was after 8 on a Wednesday, and I was alone in my apartment with a legal threat on the kitchen table, and Lloyd's letter in my bag, and the distance between those two documents felt like a canyon I couldn't cross. My phone buzzed. A text from Jess. "Just give it up, Haley. You're embarrassing yourself." I sat on the floor. The tile was cold through my jeans. The certified deed copy was on the kitchen table. Lloyd's letter was in my bag on the chair. The medical records were in my hands. And the thing I'd been building since the day Gerald Fenton called me, the certainty that I had been chosen, that my grandfather had seen me and acted on what he saw, it crumbled. It dissolved like sugar in water, and I was left sitting on the floor of an apartment I could barely afford, holding papers that said the man I loved most in the world had been losing his mind when he signed my name on a deed. Maybe they were right. Maybe Lloyd had been confused. Maybe the dumb one was exactly as dumb as everyone always said. Dumb enough to believe she was special because a sick old man put her name on a piece of paper. I got in my car without a plan. I drove south on High Street, then west on Broad, then onto the highway, and I didn't know where I was going until I got there. Griggs Reservoir, the stretch of the Scioto River where Lloyd had taken me fishing every summer from the time I could hold a rod. The parking area was empty. I walked down the bank in the dark and found the flat rock near the water's edge where he used to set up our chairs, and I sat down and listened to the river move. The air was cool and the water had that same unhurried sound it carried every season, and I closed my eyes and let it fill the space where the certainty used to be. A memory surfaced. March 2023, the month the deed was signed. I had driven out to Lloyd's house on a Saturday, and he'd made me scrambled eggs the way he always did. Too much butter, the pan slightly too hot so the edges got crispy. We sat on the porch afterward and he asked about my class, my students, the little routines of my days. He asked about the boy who struggled with letter sounds. "How's that one doing with his reading?" he said, and when I told him we'd been working on the B sound together, he nodded and said, "That's real teaching." He asked about the girl who cried every morning at drop-off and whether she'd started to settle. He asked about my lesson plan for spring. He was sharp. He was present. He was tracking the details of my life with the same care he brought to everything: the tackle box, the fishing lures, the deed transfer he'd been planning for months. That was March. The diagnosis came in September, 6 months later, and sitting on the rock by the river, I heard Theo's voice, clear as if he were standing behind me. "Your grandfather was the most thorough man I ever met." The thoroughness. That was the key. Lloyd had started planning in 2022. He came to Theo, hired an attorney, executed the deed, recorded it at the county, got a certified copy, placed it in a safe deposit box with a letter and backup documents, hid the key in the tackle box, and made sure Theo knew when to expect me. He did all of it while he was still clear, and the reason he did it then was because he could feel the clarity starting to slip. He saw the window closing, he saw the fog coming at the edges, and instead of sitting still and waiting for it, he moved. He moved with the precision and patience of a man tying a fishing lure, one step at a time, one knot at a time, because he had one thing left to do, and he was going to do it right. The deed was March. The diagnosis was September. He'd acted before the decline, and the sequence was a fact that could not be rewritten by a letter on legal stationery. I opened my eyes. The river was still there. The rock was still cold underneath me. And something had changed. The way a bone shifts back into place, and the pain is sharp but the alignment is correct. I had spent the last month trying to prove to my family that I was not the dumb one, but that was the wrong fight. The question was never whether Rhonda and Jess and Dwayne saw me clearly. The question was whether I saw myself. Lloyd had seen me. He'd seen me so clearly he'd built a legal structure around me like a wall, and all I had to do was stop apologizing for standing inside it. I didn't need my mother to say she'd been wrong. I needed to stop waiting for her to say it. That wait could last the rest of my life, and Lloyd had not given me a house so I could spend the rest of my life standing outside of it. I stood up from the rock. I walked back to my car. I drove home and picked up my phone and called Theo, and this time he answered on the second ring, and I didn't ask him what would happen if my family was right. I said, "The diagnosis was September. The deed was March. What do we need to do?" And on the other end of the line, I heard him exhale. The sound of a man who'd been waiting for exactly those words. "Come to my office tomorrow morning," he said. "I have something to show you." I was at Theo's office by 8:30 the next morning. He had coffee waiting, the cheap kind from a drip machine on the credenza, and he poured me a cup without asking how I took it, which was black, and somehow he knew that. "They're going to say he had dementia," I said. I was still in the clothes I'd driven to the reservoir in, a flannel shirt and jeans with river mud on the cuffs. I hadn't slept much, but the fog that had been sitting on me since the Henshaw and Pratt letter arrived had burned off during the drive home, and what was left underneath was something clear and hard and ready. Theo opened a file on his desk. The tab read Odom, L.A., in neat handwriting, and he turned it so I could see the document on top. "The 8th of March 2023, he said. 6 days before the deed was signed, your grandfather went to Dr. Patricia Winslow, internal medicine, here in Worthington. He specifically requested a cognitive assessment. She administered the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, which is the standard screening tool. His score was 28 out of 30. He paused to let that register. Normal range." I stared at the paper. A letter on medical stationery, signed by Dr. Winslow, with Lloyd's name and date of birth at the top and a paragraph at the bottom attesting that, in her professional opinion, Mr. Odom demonstrated full cognitive capacity at the time of evaluation. Dated the 8th of March, 2023, 6 days before the deed. "He got tested," I said, "and it came out barely above a whisper," he insisted. He told me, "They'll say I was crazy. Get me the paper that says I wasn't." Theo turned the file toward me fully. "I have the original letter, signed by Dr. Winslow, attesting to your grandfather's full capacity at the time of the transfer. He anticipated every move your family just made. The challenge, the medical records, the claim of cognitive decline. He saw it coming 3 years ago, and he made sure there was an answer waiting." I put my coffee down because my hands were shaking again, the same way they'd shaken in the bank vault when I read his letter. My grandfather had spent his last clear months building a fortress around me, and the fortress was made of paperwork, deeds, and letters, and keys, and doctor's notes, and a brass safe deposit box key hidden in a tackle box that smelled like the river. He had fought for me the way he tied his fishing lures, one careful knot at a time, because he knew I had never learned to fight for myself, and he was running out of time to teach me. "I want to bring them to the house," I said. "I want them to see all of it." Theo studied me for a moment. "I'd recommend that. The property is yours, and I think you should bring them there and present the evidence. You don't need a courtroom. You need them to look at these documents and understand that contesting this deed will cost them money they don't have for a case they won't win. They won't listen. They don't have to listen, Haley. They have to see. The deed, the cognitive assessment, the tax records. Once they see it, their attorney at Henshaw and Pratt will tell them there's nothing to litigate. He folded his hands on the desk, and his voice changed, got quieter. The legal question is settled. The question you need to answer is different. What kind of relationship do you want with these people afterward? I looked at the photograph behind him, the one of Lloyd and Theo on the riverbank with the green tackle box between them, and I thought about that question for a long time before I answered. I want them to know the truth, I said. What they do with it is up to them. 4 days later, on a Saturday morning, I parked in the driveway of 412 Maple Ridge Road. My house. I'd been here twice since Lloyd died, both times to check that the pipes hadn't frozen and the furnace was running, walking through the rooms quickly with my coat on, afraid to stay too long because it hurt too much. This time I unlocked the front door and walked in and opened every window on the first floor. The house smelled like dust and pine sol, and something underneath both of those, something warm and faintly sweet that I couldn't name but that my body recognized the way it recognized Lloyd's voice on the phone, instantly and completely. His kitchen, his air, the smell of peppermints from the jar on the counter and the cedar closet in the hallway, and 50 years of someone's life soaked into the walls. His chair was still at the head of the kitchen table. His mug still hung on the hook by the sink. I put my bag on the counter and took out the 3 documents Theo and I had organized into a manila folder, and I laid them on the table in order, left to right. The certified deed, the cognitive assessment letter from Dr. Winslow. 3 years of property tax notices from Franklin County, addressed to me. Then I sat down in the chair opposite Lloyd's and waited. Theo arrived first and took a seat by the window with his briefcase on his knees. Then my mother's car pulled into the driveway, and I heard 3 doors open and close, and my mother came through the front door first with my father behind her and Jess bringing up the rear. My mother saw Theo and stopped in the doorway, and her posture changed the way a cat's does when it spots something unfamiliar in the house. "I don't know why we're doing this here," she said, "because this is my house." I said it evenly, without raising my voice, and the sentence hung in the kitchen like the last note of a bell. I had never said those 4 words before. My mother's jaw tightened. Jess leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed and her eyes on the documents on the table. 3 things, I said. I picked up the first document. This is the recorded deed at Franklin County, the 14th of March 2023. Grantor, Lloyd Allen Odom. Grantee, Haley Marie Odom. It's been public record for 3 years. Anyone could have looked it up. I set it down. I picked up the second document. This is a letter from Dr. Patricia Winslow, Grandpa's physician, the 8th of March 2023, 6 days before the deed was signed. Grandpa went to her office and asked for a cognitive assessment. She gave him the standard screening test. He scored 28 out of 30, normal range. I set it down next to the first. He knew you'd claim he was confused. He got the paperwork before you thought to ask. I picked up the third. A stack of envelopes, each one with a Franklin County return address, each one addressed to Haley Marie Odom at my apartment in Westerville. Franklin County has been mailing me the property tax bills since 2023, because I'm the owner. The computer glitch you told me to ignore was the county doing its job. The kitchen was quiet except for the tick of Lloyd's wall clock, the same clock that had been ticking in that room since before I was born. My mother turned to Theo. "This won't hold up. We'll take it to court." Theo spoke calmly, the way he spoke about everything, as though the facts were so clear they didn't require emphasis. "Mrs. Odom, a recorded warranty deed accompanied by a contemporaneous cognitive assessment from a licensed physician is extremely difficult to challenge. Your attorney at Henshaw and Pratt will confirm that. I'd encourage you to consult with them before committing to litigation you're unlikely to win." Jess pushed off the doorframe. "This isn't fair," she said, and her voice cracked on the second word. "I'm the one who works in real estate. I should have." She stopped. The sentence died in her mouth, and I watched the irony land on her face like a hand. She was a mortgage broker. She ran title searches for a living, and she had never once checked the title on her own grandfather's house, because it never occurred to her that the dumb one might already own it. My mother pivoted. She had lost the legal argument, and she knew it, the way she always knew when a door was closing, and she reached for the only weapon she had left. "After everything we did for you," she said, and her voice dropped into that register I had been hearing since I was a child, the one that was supposed to make me feel small enough to fit back inside the shape they'd made for me. "After we raised you, and you steal your grandfather's house." The old Haley would have broken. The old Haley would have slid the deed across the table and said "I'm sorry" and driven back to Westerville and called Jess to apologize for making a scene. I could feel that version of me standing just behind my shoulder, reaching for the papers, whispering that it wasn't too late to make this go away. But Lloyd's letter was in my bag on the counter, 2 feet behind me, and his words were louder than the whisper. "Don't let them talk you into giving it back. That's not kindness, sweetheart. That's the habit they trained into you. You raised me," I said, "and every day of it, you told me I was the dumb one. You told my teachers not to bother testing me. You introduced me to your friends as the one who watches children for a living. You sat me at a table 5 weeks ago and told me I was too dumb to own a house." The clock ticked. My mother's hands were flat on the table. Theo was still by the window. Jess was in the doorway. My father was looking at Lloyd's chair. Grandpa sat at this same table and taught me to read. He drove me to the library every Saturday. He came to my graduation when you didn't. He's the reason I became a teacher. Because he showed me what a teacher actually does. I took a breath, and the next sentence came out steady and whole and mine. He didn't leave me this house because I tricked him. He left it to me because I showed up. Silence. The kind that fills a room from the floor up. My father had been looking at Lloyd's chair the entire time I was speaking. His father's chair. The chair where Lloyd had sat every morning with his coffee and his crossword and his quiet certainty about the people he loved. My father turned to me, and his eyes were red at the rims, and he said, "Dad used to say you were the only one who visited without checking the mail first." "Duane," my mother said. "She's right, Rhonda." His voice was rough and low, and it was the steadiest I had ever heard him speak in my mother's presence. We called her dumb. Dad called her the only smart one in the family. He stood up from the table. He walked to the front door without looking at my mother and without looking at Jess. The screen door closed behind him. A moment later, Jess followed. At the doorway, she paused, half a step from the threshold, and looked back at me. She didn't say anything, but the pause was there, and I saw it. And in the years that came after, I would think about that pause and wonder what was behind it. Then she was gone. My mother sat alone at the kitchen table with the 3 documents spread in front of her. The deed, the doctor's letter, the tax notices. 4 pieces of paper that had taken apart a story she'd been telling for 30 years. The story of the dumb daughter and the smart daughter and the way the world was supposed to work. She stared at them for a long time. Then she stood, and she picked up her purse from the back of the chair, and she walked out of the house without saying a word. Theo packed his briefcase. At the door, he stopped and looked at me and said, "Your grandfather would be proud of you." "He already was," I said. Theo nodded, and his eyes were bright, and he left. I was alone in the house. Lloyd's house. My house. I stood in the kitchen with the afternoon light coming through the open windows and the clock ticking on the wall and the peppermint jar on the counter and the 3 documents still on the table where I'd laid them out. I didn't pick them up. I left them there. They looked right on that table. They looked like they'd been waiting to arrive for 3 years. I walked through the rooms the way you walk through a cathedral, slowly, with your hands at your sides. Lloyd's bedroom, with the quilt folded at the foot of the bed, the same quilt he'd pulled over me during Saturday afternoon naps when I was 5. The kitchen, his mug on the hook, the jar of peppermints with the lid slightly askew the way he always left it. The drawer where he kept his Rotary newsletters in chronological order. The living room, his recliner with the left armrest worn pale and soft from decades of his hand resting there while he watched the evening news. I sat on the front porch, the same porch where he'd taught me to read when I was 8, pointing at the words in picture books one by one, never rushing, never telling me to try harder, where he'd said, "Teachers change the world. Don't let them shrink you. where we'd sat together in silence that didn't need to be filled, because silence between people who love each other is its own kind of language. I didn't cry. I had cried in the bank vault and I had cried at the reservoir, and the tears had done what they needed to do. What I was sitting in now was something past tears, a place where grief and gratitude take up the same space and you stop trying to separate them. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, I pulled into the driveway of 412 Maple Ridge Road with a cardboard box in the back seat. Inside the box were my lesson plan binders, a coffee mug from the preschool, a set of watercolor paints, and a framed photograph of Lloyd at my community college graduation. Standing in the front row, his face crumpled and proud. I was moving in. I couldn't break my apartment lease for another month, but I'd been driving out every weekend to work on the house. I'd painted the spare bedroom a pale blue. I'd fixed the kitchen faucet after watching the same YouTube tutorial 3 times. I'd planted marigolds in the window boxes the way Lloyd used to every spring. The same variety, the same spacing. Because some things are worth keeping exactly the way someone left them. I carried the box inside and set it on the kitchen table. Next to it, I placed the most recent property tax notice from Franklin County, addressed to Haley Marie Odom, 412 Maple Ridge Road, Columbus, Ohio. I didn't frame it. I just liked seeing it there on the table. My name printed in black ink on county stationery, proof that I existed in a system that didn't care who my mother was or what my sister thought of me. Proof that someone had seen me before I learned to see myself. The tackle box sat on the porch railing, open and cleaned out. I'd washed each compartment and dried it in the sun, and the base sticker had faded another shade, but it was still there, curling at the edges the way it had been for 17 years. I wasn't going to use the box for fishing. I had never liked fishing, and Lloyd had known that. He didn't care. The fishing was never the point. The sitting together was the point. The hours on the bank of the Scioto with nothing to prove and nowhere to be, and no one asking me to be faster or smarter or more like someone else. I opened a book, one of the ones Lloyd had given me over the years, a paperback with a cracked spine and his handwriting inside the front cover. For Haley, another good one. I sat in the chair on the porch and read the first page out loud. To nobody. To the evening settling over the neighborhood the way Lloyd always said it did, like a quilt coming down.
Được. Thì kéo đăng nghĩa là video đăng đấy.
Ý là xong cái video này.
Đúng rồi.